year is 1948. A young American archaeologist named Dr. Ilara Vance stands shivering in the bone-dry heat of a cave near the Dead Sea. She doesn't know it yet, but she is about to touch something that will unravel the official history of the United States and rewrite the map of the ancient world. The Jericho Puzzle. Dr. Ilara Vance was a woman out of time, or perhaps perfectly in it. Fresh out of a rigorous PhD program at the University of Chicago, she carried the grit of the American Midwest and a mind that refused to accept the academic establishment's comfortable boundaries. The world's focus was on the recent discovery of the first Dead Sea Scrolls, fragile leather-bound manuscripts containing biblical and extra-biblical texts. But Ilara's attention was fixed on a peculiar rumor circulating among the Bedouin who worked the Qumran caves, a tale of an object not written on parchment or papyrus, but on metal. "It is a riddle, Doctor," an old shepherd, Khalil, had told her, his face a roadmap of desert wrinkles, a copper letter from a king who forgot his kingdom. Following Khalil's vague, cryptic directions, Ilara found herself far from the main excavation sites, near the ancient, sun-blasted walls of Jericho. She had secured minimal funding and was working almost entirely alone, armed with little more than a geologist's hammer, a notepad, and an unshakable conviction that the most important finds were always hiding where the powerful were not looking. On that particular arid afternoon, she was inside what looked less like a proper cave and more like a shallow crevice, its entrance choked with debris from a recent rock slide. She was scraping away millennia of dust and bad guano when her pig struck something unyielding. It wasn't stone. It resonated with a dull, metallic thunk. She spent the next 3 hours carefully clearing the surrounding dirt, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. What she uncovered was not a scroll, but a tightly rolled copper cylinder, about 3 feet long and 4 inches in diameter. It was heavily oxidized, a dull verdigris green, yet its surface was covered in finely chiseled ancient script. It was the object of the Bedouin myth, the infamous copper scroll. The scroll that would eventually be designated 3Q15 was known to contain an inventory of vast hidden temple treasures, gold, silver, and precious vessels, located in specific locations around Jerusalem and the Judean desert. It was historically baffling because the treasure listed was astronomically large, seeming to defy reality, and its cryptic locations had always frustrated scholars. It was considered an outlier, perhaps even a work of fantasy by a mad scribe. Ilara, however, knew better. Her expertise wasn't just in archaeology. It was in forgotten Semitic languages and the esoteric geometrical principles of ancient mapping. When the scroll was finally and painstakingly cut open in Manchester, England, years later, because it was too brittle to unroll, Ilara was the only American invited to be part of the initial transcription team. The inventory listed 64 caches of treasure. Cache 1, in the column of the ruin which is in the valley of Achor, buried under the water basin of the cistern, in the mouth of the spring. Cache 7, in the conduit of the great wash basin, in the tomb of the sons of the first king. Cache 32, in the reservoir of the great garden, at the point of the cypress, in the great stone jar. But Ilara noticed something the European scholars, focused solely on the Holy Land, missed. In the description of the final, 64th cache, the language shifted. The precise Hebrew and Aramaic of the previous entries abruptly gave way to a hybrid, almost phonetic script, and the geographical references ceased to be local.
The 64th of the King's Bounty is in the Western Sea, before the 3 peaks that smoke, where the sun bleeds into the great salt water. There the stone of calling rests beneath the sign of the great serpent, guarded by the king's first line, near the place of the new king's ascent. "Western Sea," scoffed Professor Alistair Thorne, the lead British epigrapher. "Nonsense, a scribal error. They meant the Mediterranean. The 3 peaks that smoke must be volcanic activity in Greece or Italy, or simply a metaphor for Mount Tabor." The scribe grew tired and fanciful. Ilara shook her head. "Professor, the script changes. Look at the word for king's first line. It is not the standard Hebrew Hamalek Harishon. It's a phonetic rendering of a Punic Phoenician phrase, malak pinhak, but written with Proto-Canaanite letters. And the Great Salt Water, when translated literally from the specific root they used, does not mean sea in the general sense. It means a body of water far larger than any known lake, but less saline than the Mediterranean. She pointed to the phrase translated as the sign of the great serpent. This symbol, she traced a complex looping glyph, does not appear in any known Paleo-Hebrew or Aramaic text, but I saw something similar in a collection of pre-Columbian pottery fragments unearthed near the coast of Veracruz, Mexico, that a colleague showed me. It represented a feathered serpent deity, Quetzalcoatl. A stunned silence filled the room. The scholars exchanged dubious, pitying glances. Ilara Vance, the brilliant American, had gone off the deep end. Attributing a Dead Sea Scroll text to the Americas was academic heresy. The consensus was ironclad. No contact between the Old World and the New World before Columbus. Yet Ilara could not shake the image of the three peaks that smoke. She thought of the towering volcanic cones of Mexico, and the Great Salt Water was precisely the descriptive name Spanish explorers had later given to the Pacific Ocean, the Western Sea beyond the Continental Divide. Her path was now clear. The immense, impossible treasure, the King's Bounty, was not buried near Jerusalem. The final cache, the 64th, which she suspected held the key to the entire archive, was waiting on a different continent. The secret of the Copper Scroll did not belong to the Middle East. It belonged to a forgotten history of the Americas. The Quiet Descent. It took Ilara 2 years to secure a new, extremely unconventional grant, not from a university, but from a private consortium of wealthy American industrialists, eccentric antiquarians who enjoyed funding projects that thumbed their noses at the academic mainstream. They cared less about peer review and more about the thrill of discovery. The year was 1950. Ilara landed in Mexico City, a whirlwind of sun-drenched chaos and ancient secrets buried just beneath the asphalt. She wasn't chasing gold. She was chasing the king's first line, the ancient people tasked with guarding the final cache. Her initial research was tedious, involving a deep dive into the archives of the Franciscan order, looking for any mention of strange seafaring visitors in the centuries preceding the Spanish conquest. She found nothing definitive, only vague, persistent folklore in the local dialects of the indigenous people along the Pacific coast of modern-day Oaxaca. The legend spoke of the children of the sunship, people who spoke in a sing-song tongue and arrived from the Tlacopan, the land of the west/water, long, long ago. They brought with them a perfect, unbreakable stone tablet and a peculiar script, vertical, not horizontal, that was guarded by a special lineage of priests. Ilara finally zeroed in on the region surrounding the towering dormant volcanoes of the Central Plateau, Popocatépetl, Iztaccíhuatl, and La Malinche. These were her three peaks that smoke. From there, she traced the geological path toward the Pacific, her Great Salt Water. She found her way to a tiny, isolated coastal village, a place where the jungle met the sand in a thick green snarl. Its name was San Judas de la Costa, a place forgotten by the Mexican government and ignored by archaeologists.
It was here she met a local elder, a woman named Mama Inez, whose eyes held the weary wisdom of 100 generations. Mama Inez was the village's unofficial keeper of history, a healer and storyteller. Ilara, using a combination of respectful Spanish and halting Zapotec phrases she had painstakingly learned, presented her theory. She showed Mama Inez the drawing of the looping glyph, the sign of the great serpent, the one that was eerily similar to Quetzalcoatl. Mama Inez's hand trembled as she touched the paper. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, she led Ilara not to the prominent, well-known ruins of the area, but to a subtle break in the coastline, a secluded cove protected by a high, natural rock arch, the Stone of Calling, she presumed. They did not look like the Spanish, Mama Inez whispered, pointing to a small, almost invisible pathway leading down into the jungle's dense canopy. Their hair was braided with copper, and their skin was the color of the good dirt. They came in a boat that smelled of spices and cedar. She led Ilara to a low-lying, moss-covered stone wall, almost entirely consumed by the jungle. This wasn't a temple complex. It was a settlement. A settlement. And on the keystone of what must have been an entrance arch, Ilara found it. An inscription carved into the stone. The vertical, flowing script of the local legend. But Ilara's mind, trained in the deepest roots of Semitic languages, instantly recognized the structure. It was Proto-Sinaitic, the oldest known alphabet, an ancestral form of Phoenician, Hebrew, and Greek. It was the sing-song tongue brought by the children of the sonship. The inscription read, quite simply, "The line of Dan, the new shore." Ilara froze. The tribe of Dan, one of the legendary lost tribes of Israel. The tradition holds that the tribe of Dan were a seafaring people, famous for their trade routes and navigation, even mentioned as sailors in the biblical account of the prophetess Deborah. The scroll mentioned the king's first line, a historical and spiritual lineage of guardians, perhaps. This meant the treasure wasn't just a hoard of gold, it was an archive, a historical record preserved by a group who undertook a monumental migration across the Atlantic centuries before Christ. The implications were staggering. Ilara knew the precise location was nearby, guarded by the line of Dan, near the stone of calling, the Cove Arch, and beneath the sign of the Great Serpent, the pervasive Quetzalcoatl symbolism. The last key was the location of the new king's ascent. Mama Inez solved the final piece of the puzzle. The new king's ascent, she said, is the highest hill, where the Dan children watched the stars. It is where they chose the first of their new rulers, the one who married into the Sky People. The highest hill was a short, strenuous climb from the compound. At the summit, beneath the exposed root structure of an ancient, massive Guanacaste tree, Ilara and Mama Inez began to dig. They dug for 2 days, taking turns in the oppressive heat. Finally, they hit a solid, flat surface. It wasn't stone, but polished, smooth obsidian, perfectly fitted together like a massive sarcophagus lid. With a winch they hauled from the village, they managed to pry open the obsidian slab. Below lay a small, dry, subterranean vault. The air that rushed out was stale, metallic, and ancient.
And inside, resting on a bed of finely woven, preserved reeds, was not a chest of gold or silver, but a single, sealed, perfectly preserved cedar box, bound with tarnished copper bands. Engraved on the lid was the exact same complex glyph from the copper scroll, the sign of the Great Serpent. Ilara carefully lifted the box, its weight surprisingly light. She knew this was the 64th cache. This was the key. This was not the gold of the ancient temple. This was something infinitely more valuable, the truth. The truth about the lost tribe of Dan, their monumental journey, and the history they carried with them to a new, unsuspecting continent. This history, she suspected, did not stop at the coast of Mexico. The tribe of Dan were known as wanderers. Their new shore was only a stepping stone. She realized with a dizzying clarity that the contents of this box could not only shatter the archaeological understanding of the pre-Columbian Americas, but also shake the foundation of the very nation she called home. She opened the cedar box. Inside, resting upon a lining of delicate hammered gold leaf, were 2 objects. First, a perfectly rolled parchment scroll made of the finest gazelle hide, preserved by the dry vault. Second, a heavy, strangely shaped piece of metal ore, black, porous, and radiating a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. It was unlike any ore she had ever encountered, yet she instantly knew what it was. It was a metal that, according to ancient texts, was said to have been a gift from a visiting civilization, orichalcum, the legendary metal of Atlantis. Ilara carefully unrolled the parchment. The script was Hebrew, but a formal, archaic style reserved for religious or royal records. The opening line was a declaration, the account of the Western migration, the testament of the line of Zadok, priest of the king, concerning the establishment of the new Israel in the land of the setting sun. The first few paragraphs detailed the arduous, decades-long journey, the construction of unique, sturdy cedar and copper-plated vessels capable of oceanic travel, the careful plotting of celestial coordinates, the horrors of the great water, the Atlantic, and the staggering loss of life.
They spoke of finally landing on a green shore and the subsequent journey down the coast to the present location, where they established their first settlement. But the final pages of the scroll shifted focus. The settlement in Mexico, the new shore, was deemed too precarious. They spoke of a continuous migration, a smaller, final group moving north, following a great river, seeking a place where the people could multiply in peace, their lineage untouched by the corruption of the old world or the strife of the new. The account detailed their long journey north. They followed the great water, walking through the heat and the sand, until they reached the mouth of the Great Serpent River, which tasted sweet and had many branches, likely the Mississippi River system. They sailed upstream until they reached the place of the many-colored cliffs, where the sky fires dance in the cold months, likely the dramatic geological formations of the upper Midwest near the Great Lakes, with a reference to the Aurora Borealis. They established their final settlement in the valley where the four rivers meet, protected by the high mountains to the west, and they called it Zion.
This last reference caused Ilara's breath to catch. Zion, a biblical place, yes, but also a famous, persistent legend in early American history, the idea of a new Jerusalem, a promised land, established by God's chosen people in the heart of the continent. The early Puritan settlers believed they were fulfilling this prophecy. The Mormons later founded a literal Zion in Utah. But the scroll was thousands of years older than both groups. It detailed a settlement established long before the Vikings, long before Columbus, a sophisticated, organized society founded by a group of Hebrew-speaking, seafaring people in the central continental United States. And then, Ilara read the final paragraph, the one that linked the ancient past to her present. When the time of the iron bird comes, and the sons of the new shore return to reclaim their lineage, they shall seek the sign of the four guardians. Our people have waited, mingling with the native peoples to preserve the bloodline. Our final king, Yohanan, sealed the great archive and gave the key to his first son, whose name shall forever be passed to the eldest of the watchers. Seek the first watcher in the place where the iron bird first lands and where the first president of the new people was born. The iron bird, a frightening futuristic concept to the ancient scribe, but instantly recognizable to Ilara, an airplane, and the first president of the new people. This scroll, written by the lost tribe of Dan in the pre-Christian era, was giving specific instructions to a future seeker, a clue pointing directly to a key location in the modern United States, a place associated with the beginnings of American self-governance. The entire copper scroll, the treasure, and the lost tribe's archive, it all led to one spot, one man, and a secret buried beneath the foundations of the American Republic. Ilara knew she couldn't share this discovery. The cedar box and its contents were too dangerous, too destabilizing. They would be suppressed, discredited, or seized by powerful forces who wanted the narrative of American exceptionalism and the purity of pre-Columbian history to remain undisturbed. She sealed the vault, covered the obsidian lid, and returned the jungle to its rightful place, erasing all evidence of the dig. She carried the cedar box back to Mexico City, concealing it within a false bottom of her trunk. Her next step was clear. Follow the trail of the lost tribe of Dan, north, seeking the place where the first president of the new people was born. The trail of the lost tribe of Dan, the secret of Zion, and the final repository of the king's archive, she realized, was hidden not in the exotic desert of the Middle East, but beneath the quiet, patriotic soil of Virginia. The Virginian Paradox. It took Ilara Vance 6 months to transition from the scorching Mexican coast to the temperate, subtly oppressive humidity of late summer Virginia. She traded in her dusty archaeologist's gear for the discreet, tailored appearance of a historical researcher, blending into the atmosphere of libraries and quiet historic towns. The cedar box remained safely locked away in a numbered Swiss vault, its contents digitized and heavily encrypted on microfilm, which she carried in a locket around her neck. The original orichalcum ore, radiating its strange, cool energy, was sealed inside a lead-lined container. Ilara's destination was Westmoreland County, Virginia, the birthplace of George Washington. The scroll was unnervingly specific, where the first president of the new people was born. She understood the scribe's context: Washington, the ultimate symbol of the new nation's ascent. She began her search not at the widely recognized national monument, but at the older, more obscured historical records. If the line of Dan had settled in the continent's heartland, the hypothesized Zion, what possible connection could they have to the nascent colonial history of Virginia? Ilara's theory was audacious. The descendants of the lost tribe of Dan did not vanish. They integrated. They carried their ancestral knowledge, their script, and their objective to guard the Great Archive into the very fabric of the Native American nations, and eventually into the new European settlements. She dedicated weeks to researching the obscure local histories of Westmoreland, focusing on anomalies, strange place names, peculiar symbols on colonial markers, and any records of unusually skilled navigators or metalworkers among the early settlers or the local indigenous tribes, specifically the Potawatomi and Rappahannock. She stumbled upon a crucial document in the private collection of an old Virginian family, a fragmented early 17th century survey map of the area surrounding the Washington family's historic homestead. The map was drawn by a man named Jeremiah Stone, a little-known cartographer who accompanied Captain John Smith in the early explorations. Most of the map showed standard geographical markers, but in the corner, marking a cluster of hills near the confluence of two small tributaries, was a tiny, intricately drawn symbol. Ilara immediately recognized it. It was the same complex, looping figure from the Copper Scroll, the sign of the Great Serpent, rendered in a style that was clearly European, yet undeniably derived from the ancient glyph. Beneath the symbol, Stone had written a single cryptic notation: HP, Site of the Watcher's Lodge. HP was most likely a common abbreviation for historical property or high point, but Watcher's Lodge, that resonated perfectly with the Copper Scroll's mention of the Watchers, the lineage tasked with guarding the archive. Ilara located the physical site described on Stone's map. It was a secluded, wooded hilltop, far from the public parkland of the Washington birthplace, accessible only by a difficult scramble through thick underbrush. When she reached the summit, she found not a colonial house or a native settlement, but a small circular clearing defined by 7 massive unworked granite stones, a type of stone not native to the immediate coastal plain. The stones had been meticulously arranged, and over time they had been incorporated into the natural landscape by years of falling leaves and creeping ivy. They formed a tight, closed circle, precisely 7 feet in diameter.
Ilara, recalling the scroll's instruction to seek the sign of the 4 guardians, studied the configuration. The stones were roughly placed at the cardinal points, but she noticed 4 smaller, more distinct indentations on the interior circle, perfectly spaced, forming a square. She realized the granite stones weren't the sign themselves. They were the boundary of the ritual site. The sign of the 4 guardians was meant to be inserted into the 4 indentations. But what were the guardians? The tribe of Dan was a seafaring people, known for their skill in navigation. Ilara remembered the ancient texts speaking of the 4 primary navigational symbols of the Danites: the compass rose, the North Star, the serpent's eye, and the open hand. She spent the better part of a week meticulously clearing the indentations. They were deep and narrow, like slots designed to hold small, specialized objects. Ilara had to take a risk. She contacted the consortium that funded her, specifically an eccentric, elderly historian of colonial-era Masonic rites named Mr. Silas Kalin, who had a reputation for discretion and a bottomless supply of obscure artifacts. Kalin arrived 2 days later, flown in on a private, unmarked plane. He was a frail man with sharp, intelligent eyes, completely unfazed by Ilara's story of the lost tribe and the Copper Scroll. "It explains so much, Dr. Vance," Kalin rasped, his voice barely a whisper against the cicada din. "The early colonial period is saturated with esoteric symbolism, unexplained architectural choices, and sudden, inexplicable advancements in surveying and engineering skills among the colonists. Many of the founding fathers, Washington included, belonged to organizations whose deepest secrets involved a historical narrative far older than Plymouth Rock." Kalin opened a simple leather satchel. "You need the 4 keys, I believe, the 4 navigational seals of the Danite Guild, which you identified in your notes. I have spent 30 years collecting what I thought were merely curiosities." He pulled out 4 small, flat, cast iron plates, each about 8 inches long, clearly of great age, but astonishingly preserved. A plate showing a highly stylized compass rose with 16 precise points.
a plate depicting a single piercing star shining through a cloud, the North Star, a plate featuring a mesmerizing, unblinking eye set within a scale-like pattern, the serpent's eye, a plate showing an anatomically correct open hand, the palm facing forward. These were recovered from the personal effects of 4 different individuals, Kalin explained. One from a surveyor's kit owned by a man who trained George Washington's own surveyors, one from a chest belonging to a Potawatomi chief who mysteriously disappeared, one from a set of architectural drawings for a prominent Virginian manor, and the last, strangely, was found buried near the foundation of an early Annapolis shipyard. Elara's hands shook as she took the plates. They felt cold, dense, and oddly weighty. She took them to the summit and began to place them into the 4 indentations. The compass rose slotted perfectly into the north indentation. The North Star went into the south. The serpent's eye went into the east. The open hand slotted into the west. As the final plate clicked into place, the entire summit seemed to resonate with a low, deep, harmonic hum.
The granite stones did not move. Instead, the area directly beneath the 4 plates, forming the square defined by the indentations, began to sink. Not violently, but smoothly, silently, revealing a perfectly cut sandstone block, roughly 5 feet square. This was the entrance. Elara and Kalin worked together, using specialized hydraulic jacks that Kalin had discreetly brought to lift the sandstone block. It revealed a perfectly dry, stone-lined shaft leading straight down into the earth. The shaft, which appeared to have been constructed with remarkable skill, led down approximately 30 feet before opening into a small, dry, subterranean chamber carved into the solid bedrock. The air was cool, dust-free, and carried the faint scent of cedar and dried herbs. This was the Watcher's Lodge. At the center of the chamber, illuminated by the beam of Elara's flashlight, was a large, flat slate table resting on 4 massive legs carved with the Great Serpent symbol. Resting on the table was the Great Archive, the final, largest cache of the Copper Scroll. It was not gold, it was not silver, it was information. Piled neatly on the slate table were dozens of tightly bound clay-sealed parchment and papyrus rolls. But the most astonishing feature was a massive freestanding bronze plaque, heavily patinated but perfectly preserved. Elara approached the plaque first. It was covered in a densely packed script. Kalin, who was a specialist in colonial-era cryptology and archaic scripts, gasped. "Dr. Vance," he whispered, "this is not Hebrew or Aramaic. This is the Phoenician alphabet, the direct ancestral script of Western civilization, dating back at least 3 millennia. But the language, the lexicon, is a hybrid. It's Phoenician syntax married to a previously unknown dialect of Proto-Canaanite. This is the language of the original seagoing Danites." Elara began the agonizing frame-by-frame translation process, working through the night. The bronze plaque was not a record of treasure, it was a genealogy and a mandate. It detailed the full lineage of the Watchers, confirming their migration from the Middle East to Mexico, the first shore, and then their final settlement, Zion, in the American heartland. It listed the names of the elder Watchers who remained in the central continent and the younger Watchers who were sent back east to monitor the arrival of the next great wave of colonists. The final section of the plaque detailed the duties of the younger Watchers. Duty of preservation, to guard the physical location of the archive. Duty of assimilation, to integrate into the colonial society while maintaining a secret, specialized knowledge base. Duty of guidance, to identify and discreetly influence individuals of power who exhibited the necessary spirit of the new king, the characteristics of selfless leadership, republican ideals, and an inherent understanding of the concept of limited, divinely sanctioned authority. Then came the astonishing revelation. The line of the Watchers knew that the future new king, the first president, would be the one born near the lodge. They had been watching the local families for generations, waiting for the one born with the righteous mark. The plaque concluded with a single, massive inscription. The first president of the new people, born under the serpent's sign, is the key to the archive, for his ancestor, born 300 years past, was the first younger Watcher to pledge fealty to the new world's mandate. His lineage is not merely English, it is the blood of Dan, chosen to inaugurate the second Zion.
The implication was electrifying. George Washington, the father of the United States, was, through a hidden, maternal or collateral line, a descendant of the lost tribe of Dan, placed in position by a secret society of Watchers who had been guiding the political destiny of the American continent for centuries. The American Revolution was not just a historical accident or a political uprising. It was the culmination of a vast, deliberate, multi-millennial plan orchestrated by an invisible, powerful lineage to establish a new nation, a second Zion, based on the foundational principles they had carried from the ancient world. The very concept of republicanism and ordered liberty was perhaps an ancient Danite concept, not a product of the European Enlightenment. Alara turned to the scrolls. She carefully selected the outermost roll, whose clay seal bore the impression of a small copper ring. She gently cracked the seal and began to unroll the papyrus. It was a meticulously detailed record of the younger Watchers' activities in colonial Virginia, spanning the 17th and 18th centuries. It listed their aliases, their professions, mostly surveyors, architects, and mapmakers, and their interactions with key colonial figures. One entry, dated 1749, stood out. The Watcher Silas, the fourth of the younger generation, has begun the tutoring of the young George W., son of Augustine. The boy exhibits the necessary spirit, and the bloodline is proven. We teach him the ancient techniques of surveying, not merely for land, but for the mapping of moral space. We guide his mind toward the principles of balanced power, ensuring he understands that the power of the Watchers is not to rule, but to enable the new king's ascent. The scrolls contained evidence of their influence in everything from the layout of early colonial capitals to the subtle wording of key charters. The entire founding narrative of the United States was, in part, a staged event, guided by a secret, ancient intelligence. Alara looked at the bronze plaque again. The final hidden treasure of the copper scroll was not monetary wealth, but this unthinkable history. The Danites had not buried gold. They had buried a mandate of destiny, a claim on the historical foundation of the United States. But the sheer magnitude of the secret was overwhelming. The knowledge that the foundational myths of the nation, the idea of a spontaneous, divinely inspired rebellion, were actually the result of a coordinated, ancient, secret society operating in the shadows of colonial life, was the kind of truth that could cause a social and political cataclysm. She needed to secure the rest of the archive and understand the role of the orichalcum before anyone else, especially the shadowy international forces she knew were always tracking these ancient treasures, could discover the lodge. She realized the most pressing task was to secure the chamber. She and Kaelin carefully closed the sandstone block, returned the 4 guardian keys to the satchel, and covered the entrance with the natural debris, making the summit look undisturbed.
As they walked down the hill, Alara knew the real work had just begun. The Watcher's Lodge had provided the who and the why. Now she needed to find out what happened to the main settlement, Zion, the one established in the heartland. That was where the full power and material wealth of the tribe of Dan, the vast gold and silver listed in the first 63 caches of the Copper Scroll, must have gone. She had followed the lineage of the Watchers from the Middle East, through Mexico to Virginia. Now, the trail led inward, toward the unexplored American West. The bronze plaque mentioned the elder Watchers and their commitment to preserving the lineage among the native nations. The trail of the lost tribe of Dan and the massive treasury of the ancient world must now be sought where the many-colored cliffs meet the Great Serpent River. The secret history of the United States was about to intersect with the forgotten story of the Native American nations. The map of the Serpent River. The discovery in Virginia had confirmed Alara's wildest theories, but it left her with a crushing burden. The knowledge that the narrative of American history was fundamentally incomplete, if not deliberately obscured. She and Mr. Kaelin decided that the immediate priority was the location of the main Danite settlement, Zion, and the ultimate fate of the 63 material caches listed in the Copper Scroll. Kaelin, energized by the confirmation of his lifetime of esoteric research, used his considerable resources to outfit Alara for a complex, long-term expedition into the interior of the continent. He provided a heavily modified, self-sufficient truck disguised as a geological survey vehicle equipped with advanced ground-penetrating radar GPR, and magnetometers, tools far beyond the standard archaeological kit of the era. The focus was the geographical description from the Zardok scroll, the place of the many-colored cliffs, where the sky fires dance in the cold months, in the valley where the four rivers meet, protected by the high mountains to the west. This description placed the ancient settlement squarely in the upper American Midwest, likely somewhere near the headwaters of the Mississippi, the Great Serpent River, where its tributaries create significant river convergences, close enough to see the northern lights, sky fires, and situated east of the Rockies. Specifically, the description strongly pointed toward the region where parts of present-day Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa converge, a region known for its unique, dramatic geological formations, many-colored cliffs. Ilara began her journey following the Mississippi River north, stopping at every significant indigenous site and local museum, searching for corroborating evidence. She wasn't looking for Hebrew letters, she was looking for cultural diffusion, shared navigational symbols, advanced metallurgy, especially copperwork, which the Daonites were known for, and anomalous architectural patterns. She found compelling evidence in the ceremonial mounds of the Hopewell and Mississippian cultures. While widely studied, certain features remained inexplicable to mainstream archaeology. In a museum archive in Iowa, Ilara discovered a photograph of an artifact unearthed from a burial mound years earlier and subsequently lost, a small, intricately carved bone tablet. The tablet was dismissed by archaeologists as a decorative piece, but Ilara recognized the pattern immediately. It was a precise, technical carving of a mariner's astrolabe, a sophisticated navigational tool known to ancient Mediterranean seafarers, superimposed with the local symbol for the thunderbird. This suggested an advanced, seafaring-based culture had integrated its knowledge with the local indigenous populations. The core of her proof, however, came from a massive 19th century map of the indigenous land claims and ceremonial sites of the region. The map, drawn by a government surveyor obsessed with preserving native place names, showed a large, unusual settlement complex situated on a high, strategically defensible bluff overlooking a triple river confluence. The surveyor had recorded the local Ho-Chunk, Winnebago name for the settlement, Ahu-le-Tana. He translated it literally as the place where the Great Stone of Calling rests. The Great Stone of Calling. The very phrase used by the Copper Scroll to describe the landmark near the Mexican cache.
Ilara drove her survey truck to the location, a massive bluff near the modern-day city of Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, a site already famous for its ancient earthworks. However, Ahu-le-Tana was slightly upstream from the known sites, a dense wooded area that had never been extensively excavated because it was thought to be a late-period farming settlement. When she deployed the GPR, the results were stunning. The ground beneath the unassuming layer of topsoil was riddled with complex, non-natural structures. Not just burial mounds, but massive, multi-layered foundations for large, interconnected buildings, geometrically arranged in a precise, radial pattern. At the center, the GPR indicated a large, subterranean anomaly, a vast, hollow space. This was Zion. She spent a week in the remote woods, under the cover of a falsified environmental study, carefully digging test pits. The earthworks at this location were different from the surrounding sites. While the surface revealed typical native pottery shards, the deeper layers the foundations of the radial city, yielded construction materials unique to the Americas. Sun-baked brick mixed with fibrous reeds and pulverized seashells, a construction method known only to a few isolated coastal Mediterranean cultures. In one of the deep foundational layers, she uncovered a small, flat piece of copper sheeting, no larger than her hand. It was brittle, heavily corroded, but carefully inscribed. It was a fragment of the Danite script, a short, chilling entry. The great sickness took the king and his first sons, and the people scattered like dust on the wind. We hid the wealth in the earth mound, sealing the 63 in the manner of the old kingdom. Only the knowledge must survive. The watchers must leave now, taking only the lineage to wait for the new shore to come to them. The fragment was the final piece of the puzzle. A devastating epidemic, likely brought by early, unrecorded contact, had wiped out the main settlement centuries before European colonization. Before their dispersal, the remaining Danites had followed the Copper Scroll's precise instructions. They buried the immense material wealth, the 63 caches of gold, silver, and precious artifacts, in a massive ceremonial earth mound, sealing it with the geometric principles of their ancient architecture. Alara consulted the GPR results for the central anomaly again. It was enormous, roughly 40 feet high and 200 feet long, and its interior was unusually complex. It wasn't a solid mound of earth. It was a vault of engineered tunnels and chambers, disguised as a ceremonial hill. She knew the risks of excavating this alone. The minute she breached the perimeter, the signal would be lost, and the global network of treasure hunters and national... The orichalcum engine. Before Kalen could mobilize a team, Ilara faced an unexpected crisis. 2 days after locating the burial mound, she was approached by a man claiming to be a U.S. Forest Service agent, asking pointed questions about her survey. His jacket was clean, his truck too new, and his eyes held a cold, professional disinterest that screamed government intelligence. Ilara played the role of the frustrated academic, packing up her equipment and feigning disappointment. She drove 20 miles south, ditched her truck in a remote farming field, and doubled back on foot under the cover of darkness, carrying only her tools and the lead-lined box containing the orichalcum ore she found in Mexico. She returned to the mound and, using a combination of precision explosive charges and carefully placed hydraulic drills, she breached the eastern flank of the central earthen structure. She slipped into the complex tunnel system. The interior was magnificent and terrifying. The Danites had used a technique unknown in the Americas, cyclopean masonry, using perfectly fitted massive stones to line the walls and ceiling of the central vault, preventing collapse. In the center of the vault, resting on a pedestal carved with interlocking serpents, was the reason for the mound's vast size. A massive, perfectly formed golden arc, perhaps 10 feet long and 5 feet high, intricately carved. It was not the Ark of the Covenant, but the Ark of the Danite treasure, containing the total accumulation of the 63 listed caches, gold artifacts, silver ingots, gemstones, and ceremonial vessels of staggering historical and material value. Alara ignored the gold. She knew the gold was just the bait. She was drawn to the pedestal itself. The massive stones of the pedestal were connected to the floor by thick, segmented copper wiring that snaked outward into the walls of the chamber. At the top of the pedestal, there was a shallow, dish-like depression, a perfect fitting for the orichalcum ore. Ilara realized this chamber was not just a vault, it was an ancient energy system. The porous, heavy radioactive seeming orichalcum was not just a metal, it was a power source, likely a highly stable, low-yield radioactive element, used to generate energy or perhaps to generate a constant, protective magnetic field that had kept the chamber dry and preserved for millennia. The Danites were not just master mariners and traders, they were practitioners of an astonishingly advanced, forgotten science. This orichalcum engine had been the power source of their entire settlement, sustaining their complex civilization. Elara carefully placed the block of orichalcum ore into the depression on the pedestal. A profound, low-frequency hum instantly filled the chamber. The copper wiring began to glow with a faint, internal bluish light. The golden arc, which had been dull, suddenly gleamed with an impossible, reflective brilliance. Then, a phenomenon occurred that defied everything Elara knew about physics and acoustics. The air in the chamber began to vibrate in a patterned way. Out of the vibrating air, a holographic projection materialized above the arc. It was a map. Not a static scroll, but a dynamic, three-dimensional projection of the entire North American continent, centered on the Mississippi River. The rivers glowed blue, the mountains red, and the Great Lakes shone like polished glass. The map pulsed, highlighting three distinct locations in quick succession. A dense cluster near the Great Salt Lake in the far west. A deep underground facility near a major copper deposit in the southwest. A massive radiating hub on the east coast, near the city the Watchers had helped design, Washington, D.C. Suddenly, the map coalesced into a single, massive geometric symbol hovering over the D.C. area, a complex interlocking pattern that she recognized from an obscure, early architectural drawing she had seen in Kalen's archives, the foundational Masonic diagram for the layout of the U.S. Capitol building. The holographic image faded, replaced by ancient Danite text that scrolled across the air. The archive is the wealth. The ark guards the key. The engine guides the destiny. The lineage remains in the three sites. The first Watcher's descendants hold the knowledge of the final mandate. The power of orichalcum must be returned to the capital, for the maintenance of the second Zion requires the continuous, silent energy of the Old Kingdom. The implication was clear. The Watchers hadn't just guided the founding of the U.S. They had ensured that the very physical structure of the nation's capital, specifically the Capitol building, was designed to incorporate and, at some point, utilize the powerful energy source of the Lost Tribe, the orichalcum. The hum intensified, and the floor of the chamber began to tremble. The orichalcum engine was now fully activated. Before Elara could analyze the full complexity of the map or the implications for the nation's power grid, she heard the sound of heavy equipment and shouting outside. The fake Forest Service agent had returned, and this time, he wasn't alone. They had located her breach. Elara snatched the orichalcum ore from the pedestal, extinguishing the holographic map. The arc immediately went dull, and the humming ceased. As the first burst of automatic gunfire shattered the air just outside the tunnel entrance, Elara realized her discovery had been intercepted. The U.S. government, or a highly specialized secret department within it, was not just aware of the possibility of the Lost Tribe. They were actively hunting the archive and its power source. She had to get out. But more importantly, she had to ensure the information and the engine block were safely extracted. The final mandate, the reason the Lost Tribe went to such extraordinary lengths to establish the U.S. as the second Zion, was now her final, ultimate mission. She scrambled into a narrow, secondary tunnel, indicated on a small, engraved copper plate near the pedestal. It was too small for a man to follow easily. As she disappeared into the darkness, the roar of the intruders entering the main vault echoed behind her, their shouts turning to astonished, greedy silence as they discovered the massive golden ark. Ilara's decision was made. They could have the gold. She would take the power and the knowledge. She had the orichalcum, the Zadok scroll, and the key locations for the lineage: Utah, the Southwest, and Washington, D.C. Her next move had to be swift, aiming for the heart of the system, the capital the Watchers had secretly established.
The Deep State and the Watchers Protocol. Ilara emerged from the secondary tunnel late that evening, exhausted and covered in muck, miles away from the excavation site. She knew the government agency, whoever they were, would lock down the entire region. The discovery of the Golden Ark was a massive event that would be immediately classified and swallowed by the military-industrial complex. She managed to reach a small, anonymous motel 50 miles away and contacted Mr. Kalin using a highly secure, encrypted communication line he had given her. Kalin's voice was grim. "They aren't the FBI, Ilara. They are the Directorate of Historical Operations, DHO. They were established quietly under the Truman administration, ostensibly to recover Nazi gold, but their true mandate is the acquisition and classification of any artifact that could fundamentally destabilize American political history. They call people like us narrative threats." "They know about the orichalcum," Ilara stated, her voice tight. "They are after the power, not just the history." The holographic map showed 3 key locations where the Dananite lineage survives and guards information: Utah, the Southwest, and D.C. Utah and the Southwest, Kalin mused. That aligns perfectly with long-standing rumors of unexplained metallurgical secrets among the early Mormon pioneers and certain Pueblo tribes. But D.C. is the crux. The Watchers must have maintained a secret society right under the nose of the government they helped create. Ilara explained the final message from the orichalcum engine: the power must be returned to the capital. They built the city to house this energy. It's not just symbolic, Silas, it's structural. The capital isn't just a building, it's a machine designed to draw silent, ancient energy. Kalin, a lifetime student of esoteric architecture, was suddenly quiet. The geometric anomalies, the precise alignment of the foundational cornerstones, the hidden crypt beneath the rotunda, often attributed to L'Enfant's original plan. It all makes a terrifying kind of sense. The capital is the second Zion's heart. They devised a plan. Ilara was too hot to travel directly to D.C. The DHO would be monitoring all airports and rail lines. Kalin would handle the logistics, securing a clandestine route to the Southwest, the second location, to seek the support of the remaining Dananite lineage, the Elder Watchers. The Elder Watchers were meant to maintain the ancient knowledge, Kalin explained. If anyone knows the final mandate, the true purpose of activating the orichalcum engine in the capital, it is them. They will be the only ones powerful enough to stand against the DHO.
The Copper Citadel. Ilara's journey took her across the vast, silent landscapes of the American Southwest, a region geographically and culturally alien to her previous excavations. Her destination was the ancient lands of the ancestral Puebloans in the Four Corners region, specifically a deep, inaccessible canyon in New Mexico, renowned for its massive cliffside dwellings. She followed the clues from the Zadok scroll and the faint imagery of the orichalcum map. The map had highlighted a large copper-rich deposit near a confluence of ancient trails, suggesting the Danites had sought a region where they could continue their advanced metallurgy. She found the local guide Kalin arranged, a taciturn Navajo man named Tome Yazi, who was a historian of his people's sacred sites. Tome was immediately aware of a history that contradicted the standard colonial narrative. "We speak of the Chindita, the Star People," Tome explained as they trekked through the sun-baked canyon lands. "They came long ago, before the Spanish, They did not settle with us, but they taught our ancestors the deep ways of the stone and the hidden veins of the earth. They spoke of a great city that fell far to the north, and their final children left us with a promise. Tomei led Ilara to a colossal multi-story structure carved directly into the cliff face, a place mainstream archaeologists believed was an abandoned, complex dwelling site. But the structure was different. It wasn't organic like the other ruins. It was engineered. The stones were cut with impossible precision, and the main entrance was capped by a single monolithic lintel. On that lintel, carved beneath the familiar Pueblo sun symbol, was the unmistakable sign of the Great Serpent. This was the Copper Citadel, the regional outpost of the Elder Watchers. Tomei stood back respectfully as Ilara entered the cool, echoing darkness of the structure. The main chamber was circular and immense, centered around a large kiva, a sacred subterranean chamber used for rituals. As Ilara approached the kiva's entrance, she saw that the steps were not carved from local sandstone. They were faced with thin, highly polished sheets of copper. At the bottom of the copper-lined kiva, she found the Elder Watcher. He was an aged man, sitting cross-legged in the center of the circular chamber, his face deeply lined, wearing simple traditional robes, but with a silver pendant shaped like the compass rose around his neck. His name was Zadok. Zadok did not look surprised to see her. "We have been waiting for the Iron Bird, Dr. Vance. We have been waiting since the plague scattered us from Zion. The Watchers of the West, we are the memory. The Watchers of the East, they are the political arm." Ilara showed him the orichalcum. The dark, porous metal seemed to hum in the deep silence of the kiva. "The stone of heaven," Zadok said, his voice ancient and resonant. "It is the gift of the sunship people who first brought our fathers across the great water. It is the core of the ancient Danite power system." Zadok revealed the true, chilling extent of the Danite plan. The purpose of the Second Zion, your United States, is not merely to establish a righteous republic. It is to survive the great cataclysm. He explained that the Danite astronomers, using the advanced instruments they brought from the Old World, had predicted a cyclical, massive geological and solar event, a period of intense solar flares and crustal instability that would occur in the modern era. "The Capitol building in your Washington city," Zadok continued, "is built upon a precise geomagnetic nexus point. When the orichalcum is installed in the hidden crypt beneath the rotunda, it will activate the aegis, a massive, silent magnetic shield generated by the orichalcum's energy. This shield will protect the heart of the government and the intellectual capital of the nation during the cataclysm. It is the ultimate survival protocol for humanity." The final mandate was not political, it was existential. The Watchers had established the U.S. not out of piety, but out of necessity, creating a strong, stable government at the exact geographical location that could best survive the coming global disaster. "But the DHO is hunting this," Ilara countered. "They want the power, not the protection. They found the Ark of Gold, and they will try to seize the orichalcum." Zadok nodded sadly. "The lineage of the Eastern Watchers has been corrupted. They merged too closely with the political structure, and the Lords of Iron, the men who run the DHO, have become their masters. They believe the Aegis can be weaponized, or that its energy can be used to achieve permanent global dominance, not just survival." He then gave Ilara the key she needed, a small, detailed copper and leather map of the hidden passages beneath Washington, D.C., created by the younger Watchers during the city's construction. The DHO is controlled by an inner circle that knows about the orichalcum, Tzadok warned. You must reach the capital crypt before they do. They are likely tracking Kalen now. You are alone, Dr. Vance, but the mandate is yours. He pointed to a small, sealed earthen vessel in the corner. Inside this is the water of reckoning, a highly advanced, non-toxic chemical compound created by our ancestors. If the DHO attempts to seize the orichalcum, this water, when mixed with the ore, will cause an immediate, highly directional burst of magnetic energy. It will disable all modern electronics within a 1-mile radius, a temporary targeted electromagnetic pulse, or EMP. Use it only as a last resort to stop them from weaponizing the stone. Ilara took the vessel and the map. Her mission had shifted from archaeology to espionage and ultimately to saving the world from its own government. She was racing not to find history, but to fulfill a future prophecy. Her next, final destination, Washington, D.C.
The descent into the crypt. Ilara arrived in Washington, D.C. under the cover of a massive thunderstorm, the exact chaotic weather she needed to mask her movements. Kalen, operating in the shadows, had provided her with an identity as a low-level historical consultant with clearance to access certain restricted architectural archives. She spent 2 frantic days studying the copper and leather map Tzadok had given her. It revealed a network of service tunnels and forgotten conduits beneath the city, all leading toward the centerpiece, the Capitol Crypt. The crypt, a majestic pillared space beneath the Capitol Rotunda, was an area often cited by conspiracy theorists as the hidden heart of the Freemasonic city plan. Officially, it was empty, designed to house the body of George Washington, which was ultimately never interred there. The Donite map, however, showed a hidden sublevel beneath the formal crypt, a chamber that had been walled off and forgotten immediately after the Capitol's construction. The map showed the precise location of the hidden access point, a seemingly innocuous, slightly loose tile in the floor of an air duct maintenance room in the sub-basement. Under the pre-dawn silence, Ilara accessed the maintenance room. Using a small, specialized tool Kalen had provided, she quickly lifted the loose tile. Beneath it was a heavy, circular bronze hatch, sealed by a locking mechanism whose complexity spoke of ancient technology, not 19th century engineering. The Danite map held the solution, a specific sequence of 3 rotations timed precisely to the tolling of the clock tower's bell. As the pre-dawn bells chimed, Ilara manipulated the locking wheel. With a heavy thunk, the bronze hatch disengaged. She lifted it, revealing a short vertical shaft leading down into absolute darkness. She climbed down the rusted rungs, descending into a chamber so old, so cut off from the modern world, it felt like stepping onto a different continent. The air was sterile and cool. This was the Aegis chamber, the heart of the second Zion machine. The chamber was small, circular, and lined entirely with seamlessly fitted slate, similar to the material in the Watcher's Lodge. In the center was a massive empty stone basin, perfectly sized to receive the orichalcum. The basin was connected to the walls and ceiling by thick bundles of fiber-optic cables encased in braided copper sheathing, the same ancient wiring Ilara had seen in Zion. The entire chamber was designed to be an electrical conduit for the ancient low-frequency power source. As Ilara moved toward the center of the chamber, she heard a sound that chilled her to the bone, the scrape of metal on stone above her. The DHO had found the maintenance room. They were moments away from accessing the shaft. She had been followed. The DHO had likely anticipated her move to the capital, the obvious final location. Ilara knew she had seconds. She pulled out the orichalcum ore and the small sealed vessel containing the water of reckoning.
she had a choice. Install the orichalcum immediately and activate the Aegis, protecting the capital and fulfilling the final mandate, but risking the DHO seizing the knowledge of the system. Or use the EMP device to buy time, but risk permanent damage to the Aegis chamber. The shouts of the DHO agents were echoing down the shaft now. Ilara made her move. She swiftly set the orichalcum into the slate basin, fulfilling the first part of the mandate. The moment the ore touched the slate, the room came alive. The braided copper conduits lining the walls began to glow with the same faint, intense blue light she had seen in the Zion vault. A low, powerful harmonic hum filled the chamber. The Aegis was charging. Before the full power could cycle up, she heard the boots of the first DHO agent landing on the floor behind her. "Hold! Do not move, Dr. Vance," barked the agent, his flashlight beam pinning her to the basin. He was wearing the sterile, specialized uniform of the Directorate, and he held a specialized seizure device aimed at the orichalcum. "The game is over," the agent said, his voice cold and triumphant. "You've done our job for us. Now step away from the stone of heaven." Ilara, standing over the humming basin, gave him a small, grim smile. "It's not over. It's just the reckoning." With a sudden, violent movement, she smashed the sealed earthen vessel of the water of reckoning against the slate basin. The highly reactive liquid splashed across the surface of the orichalcum, which was now radiating a massive, chaotic energy field. A blinding, intense flash of blue-white light erupted from the basin. The air instantly ionized with ozone. The resulting sound was not an explosion, but a deafening, tearing scream of pure magnetic force. The highly directional, localized EMP burst radiated outward from the Aegis chamber. The DHO agent immediately collapsed, screaming as the sophisticated seizure device in his hands erupted in sparks and molten plastic. Outside the chamber, the lights of the Capitol sub-basement flickered and died. A mile-wide circle of Washington, D.C. went instantly dark, suffering a catastrophic targeted electronic failure. The Directorate's tracking networks, communications, and surveillance systems were temporarily annihilated. Ilara felt the intense magnetic shock, but the ancient copper-lined chamber protected her from the worst effects. She was dazed but alive. She looked at the orichalcum. The destructive force of the EMP had temporarily destabilized the ore, but it was still pulsing, beginning to settle into a steady, soft blue hum. The Aegis was damaged, but online. She had achieved the ultimate diversion. The DHO was crippled, the Aegis was activated. But she still didn't know the final piece of the mandate, the full potential of the orichalcum engine. The Elder Watchers in the southwest were silent now, cut off by the EMP. Suddenly, a voice echoed in the chamber, not from the shaft, but from the far wall, where a subtle line of light appeared. "Well done, Dr. Vance. You truly are the key the Watchers waited for." The slate wall slid silently open, revealing a tunnel leading into the shadows. Standing there was a man in a simple, tailored suit, holding an oil lamp. It was Silas Kalen. "The Watchers knew the DHO would follow you," Kalen explained, stepping into the blue light of the Aegis chamber. "I am the last of the Eastern Watchers, Ilara. My ancestors helped build this tunnel. Now I will show you the true heart of the second Zion." Kalen led her into the tunnel, away from the crippled capital and the dark, silent city above, toward the final, unthinkable secret hidden beneath the foundations of the American Republic. Beneath the founder's feet, Kalen led Ilara through the claustrophobic, earth-scented tunnel. It was a passage known only to the original builders and the lineage of the Watchers, a secret escape from the Aegis chamber directly into the substrata of the District of Columbia. "The DHO will recover quickly," Kalen muttered, holding his oil lamp steady. "They've been tracking us since the Midwest. My mistake was underestimating their reach, but the EMP bought us precious hours. They'll assume we're trapped in the blast zone." "Where does this lead, Silas?" Ilara asked, her voice hushed by the overwhelming ancient presence of the tunnel. "To the original foundation," Kalen replied, "the place where L'Enfant, under the guidance of the Watcher's most trusted agent, laid the very first stone of the city. The true spiritual heart of the second Zion is not the capital itself, but the hidden chamber beneath it." They traveled for nearly an hour, the tunnel spiraling downwards, the air growing colder and drier. Finally, they emerged into a vast, naturally occurring limestone cavern deep beneath the bedrock of the city. In the center of the cavern stood a architectural marvel, a massive freestanding structure that predated the city above by millennia. It was a ziggurat-like platform, carved entirely of black, glassy obsidian, rising perhaps 30 feet high, its corners aligned perfectly to the cardinal directions. This was the structure the Watchers had named the Stone of the Covenant of Dan. It was the first temple of the Lost Tribe on American soil, built by the Elder Watchers before their dispersal from Zion. On the summit of the obsidian structure, bathed in the pale light of Kalen's lamp, rested a single object, the missing 64th cache. It was not gold or silver, nor was it a scroll. It was a perfectly smooth, crystalline obsidian tetrahedron, nearly 6 feet tall, suspended above the platform by a complex arrangement of copper and bronze wires. The tetrahedron pulsed with a low, deep internal light, reflecting the residual blue energy from the orichalcum engine in the chamber above. "This is the last cache, Ilara," Kalen whispered, awe in his voice. "The thing the copper scroll warned us about. This is the final mandate." Kalen explained that the Danites knew that a government, even one founded on Republican ideals, would eventually become corrupt or face catastrophic external threats. The Aegis was the shield, but the obsidian tetrahedron was the archive's interface, the system's brain. The tetrahedron contains the total compressed knowledge of the Lost Tribe's science, history, and philosophy. It is also a highly advanced geoseismic sensor and predictive model. It has been monitoring the crustal and solar threats for 3,000 years. The Aegis's true function is to feed power to this tetrahedron, to maintain the shield, and, critically, to receive the warning protocol. The warning protocol, Kalen explained, was the ultimate safety measure. When the obsidian tetrahedron detected the precise moment the impending great cataclysm, the global solar and geological event, would strike, it would transmit a singular, unmistakable signal to the leadership of the second Zion. The DHO believes they can control the power of the orichalcum to rule the world. They are blind fools. The power is only a battery. The real treasure is this knowledge. Kalen then confessed his true identity and mission. He is not merely a historian. He was the chief watcher. His role was to guard the Watcher's Lodge and ensure the correct lineage was identified. I was too slow. The DHO's inner circle, a cabal of powerful, shadowy figures who learned of the orichalcum's existence 50 years ago, corrupted our ranks and seized control of the political watchers. "What is the ultimate risk?" Ilara pressed, looking at the ominous black structure. "The DHO is trying to use the residual Danite network to find the Utah lineage, the third group. The Utah Watchers hold the final encrypted code, the deactivation key. If the DHO gets that key, they can shut down the Aegis, seize the orichalcum, and potentially use the tetrahedron's predictive model for strategic military advantage, abandoning the mandate to save the world." The orichalcum engine, Aegis, was now active, drawing energy from the ancient core of the Earth and providing a low-level magnetic field to the capital. The obsidian tetrahedron was online, calculating the cataclysm's timing. Ilara's new mission was to find the deactivation key before the DHO and ensure the safety of the Utah Watchers. Kaylin handed her a small, intricately carved cedar box, a smaller replica of the one she found in Mexico. This contains the ancestral key to the Utah archive. Go west, Ilara. We must win the race for the key, or the whole project, the thousands of years of planning that established the United States, will fail, and the world will face the cataclysm without its shield. The Salt Lake lineage. Ilara once again utilized Kaylin's resources, securing a light aircraft and pilot to take her cross-country. Her destination, the heart of the American West, the region around Salt Lake City, Utah, the Zion established by the Mormon pioneers, but which the Danite map had indicated was the location of a much older, deeper settlement. The scroll's cryptic reference to the Utah lineage was tied to the concept of the Great Salt Water and the idea of a people who made the desert bloom with the memory of the Old Kingdom. Ilara's investigation led her not to the grand temples of the modern city, but to the forgotten older settlements in the remote canyons surrounding the valley. She focused on the early 19th century records of the pioneers, looking for anomalies, unexplained skills, sudden wealth, or knowledge of advanced hydraulic engineering. She found it in the story of a small, isolated settlement founded high in the Wasatch Mountains in the 1850s, a place called Ethelberg, named for a figure from obscure European mythology, yet using architectural styles resembling the massive stone foundations of Zion in the Midwest. Ethelberg was suddenly and completely abandoned in 1893, its inhabitants vanishing without a trace, leaving behind immaculate fields and fully functioning advanced irrigation systems, systems far more complex than any known technology of the era. Ilara found a local Paiute guide named Shoshone, whose grandmother had lived near the abandoned town. Shoshone knew the truth. The people of Ethelberg were the stone speakers. They built the deep, silent irrigation tunnels that still water the valley. They did not leave because of the laws or the hunger. They left because their watch was done. They had delivered the final key to the designated keeper. Shoshone led Ilara to the highest point above the abandoned town, a massive granite outcropping that offered a breathtaking view of the valley and the Great Salt Lake. On the smooth vertical face of the granite, hidden by a heavy growth of lichen, Ilara found the sign. 3 simple, stylized marks. They were not Hebrew, Phoenician, or Native American. They were the trident of Poseidon, the ancient symbol of the god of the sea, but rendered with a subtle internal loop, the merged symbol of the seafaring tribe of Dan. The Utah Watchers were the record keepers. Their mission was to guard the full, untainted mathematical record of the Danite lineage and the final code. Ilara and Shoshone spent 2 days clearing the lichen. Beneath the trident, they found a small circular cavity carved into the stone, sealed with ancient mortar. Ilara used a small surgical tool to remove the mortar. Inside the cavity was a single, fragile object, a silver locket, tarnished but whole. It was engraved with the initials J.S. and contained a single folded sheet of ancient, brittle paper.
Ilara carefully unfolded the paper. It was written in a highly stylized, almost pictorial Hebrew. It was the Watcher's Testament, a personal note from the final Watcher of Ethelberg. The note directed the finder to the temple's heart, where the sky stones are counted. It stated that the final code had been entrusted to the guardian of the veil and embedded in the temple's foundational text. The note ended with the name of the recipient of the code, J.S. The only famous historical figure in the Utah settlement era with those initials who dealt with foundational texts was Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon faith.
Ilara realized the truth. The Utah Watchers had assimilated into the Mormon movement, providing the community with key architectural and organizational knowledge, and safeguarding their final secret within the very fabric of the faith's foundational documents. The DHO was racing her to the key, not realizing that the key wasn't a physical artifact, but a cipher hidden in plain sight. As Ilara copied the last lines of the testament, Shoshone suddenly gripped her arm. "They come, man in the black birds. They followed the path of the stone speakers." High above, Ilara heard the telltale thump, thump, thump of heavy military helicopters. The DHO had found the Utah Watcher's signature. Ilara and Shoshone scrambled down the cliff face. They had to reach a secure, public location where the DHO couldn't risk a direct attack. The final confrontation was now inevitable, but Ilara held the code's location. The DHO held the military force. Ilara looked down at the silver locket, the key to unlocking the power of the second Zion. She was heading back to the place the Watchers started, the great halls of the ancient sacred texts, now enshrined in the modern world. The battle for the destiny of the United States would be fought in the library, not the field. The cipher of the foundational text. Ilara successfully evaded the DHO's air patrols in Utah and, with a final covert assist from Talen's network, was flown back east. She landed not in D.C., but in a safe house provided by Kalen in Philadelphia, the birthplace of the Declaration of Independence and a city steeped in the architectural and philosophical secrets the Watchers had used. Ilara's immediate task was to decipher the Watcher's testament and extract the deactivation key. The note indicated the key was hidden in the temple's foundational text and entrusted to J.S., almost certainly Joseph Smith. The most logical text was the Book of Mormon, a foundational work of American religious history, containing a narrative of ancient peoples migrating to the Americas. Ilara secured a first edition copy of the text and spread it out on a large table. The testament's final line, written in the ancient pictorial Hebrew, provided the instructions for the cipher. The code rests upon the first son, whose name is lifted by the third sign, counted backward from the place of the first king's grief, using the numeric value of the serpent's eye. It was a complex, multi-layered cipher combining Hebrew gematria, Danite chronology, and specific textual references. The serpent's eye numeric value. From the Watchers Lodge in Virginia, Ilara recalled that the serpent's eye, a key navigational symbol, was traditionally assigned the numerical value of 18 in the Danite Guild system, symbolizing the 18-point compass used by their seafaring ancestors. The place of the first king's grief. This was a reference to the Old Testament narrative of the tribe of Dan's history. It referred to the city of Laish Dan, which was conquered and rebuilt by the tribe, symbolizing their failure to maintain their original settlement. The name Dan in Hebrew gematria has the value of 54. The grief referenced the loss, so Ilara decided on the value 54. The first son lifted by the third sign. The first son refers to the first Danite king mentioned in the Zadok scroll, Yohanan. The third sign was the open hand symbol, west, which often represented lineage and succession in Danite iconography. Ilara's theory. The cipher was based on the 18th word, counting backward from the 54th occurrence of the name Yohanan in a specific chapter of the Book of Mormon. But Yohanan wasn't in the Book of Mormon. The text was religious and named its figures differently. She had to find the Danite analog in the text. She worked through the night, cross-referencing the Danite genealogy with the Book of Mormon's list of early American prophets and leaders who fit the description of a first king or first son, King Benjamin. The text's description of King Benjamin's character, a selfless leader, a preserver of records, and a founder of a new nation, mirrored the Watcher's description of the new king. Benjamin was the Danite analog.
In the Book of Mormon,
the book of Mosiah, chapter 2, Ilara found the narrative of King Benjamin's final address. She meticulously counted. The 54th occurrence of the name Benjamin was near the end of the chapter. She then counted 18 words backward from that point. The 18th word was zeal. It seemed too simple, too archaic, but the Danite scrolls used archaic, foundational words for their key commands. Zeal, Zion, Aleph, Lamed, in the ancient Hebrew root meant fervor or divine authority. This word, zeal, was the deactivation key, the command phrase that would temporarily shut down the Aegis engine and allow her to safely retrieve the orichalcum before the DHO could seize control. However, a sudden chill ran down Ilara's spine. Why would the Watchers provide a deactivation code and not an activation code? She reread the final line of the testament. The code was not to shut down the Aegis, but to turn the Aegis to its ultimate purpose, the full realization of the mandate. The word zeal wasn't a shut-down switch, it was the master override command. Ilara looked out the window. The sky was the pale gray of dawn. Her time had run out. She had to get back to the capital. The Siege of the Crypt. Ilara drove Kalen's unmarked car back into the still recovering Washington, D.C. The EMP had been a catastrophe for the DHO. Their communications were sporadic, and the city's power grid was still struggling, giving her the chaotic cover she needed. She accessed the Capitol grounds from a different, less guarded quadrant. She was wearing a borrowed maintenance uniform and carrying the small, lead-lined container holding the orichalcum. She found the access to the Aegis chamber compromised. The DHO agents had managed to climb down the shaft and were now setting up a temporary command post near the entrance to the inner chamber, sealing off the crypt above. Ilara knew she couldn't use the same route. She needed the final, desperate recourse Kalen had provided, the architect's key. Kalen had given her a sophisticated, antique-looking brass key, explaining it was the master key to the Capitol's deepest utility passages, designed by the Watcher who advised L'Enfant. She slipped into the deepest level of the building's foundations, following a maintenance tunnel that ran parallel to the inner security perimeter. She found the ancient stone-lined door marked with the compass rose. The key slid in, and the tumblers clicked with the sound of centuries. The door opened into a narrow, dark passage that led directly into the Aegis chamber, not through the shaft, but through a hidden portal in the chamber's back wall near the base of the central basin. Ilara slid into the chamber. It was filled with the powerful, vibrating blue-white light of the activated orichalcum. The DHO agents were there, 3 heavily armed men, and standing over the basin, a man in a pristine, tailored suit. This was the director of the DHO himself, Marcus Thorne, a former military intelligence officer with a reputation for ruthlessness. "Dr. Vance, I should have known you wouldn't let your little toy go," Thorne said, turning, his face etched with cold fury. "The EMP was a costly move, but now the game is finished. The orichalcum is ours." Thorne held a device that looked like a large metallic clamp. "This is a Faraday containment unit. It will neutralize the magnetic field and allow us to extract the ore safely, and then we will begin decoding the Aegis. We will not just survive the cataclysm, we will control it." "You don't understand the mandate, Director," Ilara replied, moving closer to the basin. "The Aegis isn't a weapon, it's a shield for everyone." Fairy tales, Thorn sneered, advancing toward the basin. This country was founded on power, Doctor, not ancient myths. I will secure that power now. Thorn placed the containment unit near the orichalcum. The blue light intensified, screaming in magnetic opposition.
Elara knew she had one chance. She had to act now, before Thorn could clamp the ore. She didn't have time to retrieve the orichalcum. She had to use the master override. She shouted the only word she had. Zeal! The word, spoken in the confines of the power-filled chamber, resonated with the metallic core of the Aegis. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. The blue light did not vanish or diminish. Instead, it intensified tenfold, changing color from blue-white to a blazing, pure white, almost painful to look at. The entire chamber began to shake violently. The Aegis engine was not shutting down. It was achieving its final state. The pure white energy began to stream not just into the walls, but downward, penetrating the bedrock toward the obsidian tetrahedron in the cavern below. Thorn stumbled back, dropping the containment unit, which instantly melted into slag. "What have you done?" he screamed. "I activated the final mandate," Elara shouted over the roaring energy. The white light focused intensely on a single spot on the chamber's ceiling, the exact center of the Capitol Rotunda floor above them. From that point, a massive, powerful beam of energy shot upward, passing through the earth, the foundation, and the hundreds of feet of stone above. The obsidian tetrahedron had received the master override. It was beginning to transmit the final, dire prediction. Thorn saw his plan collapsing. He lunged at Elara, trying to physically remove her from the basin. Elara sidestepped him, grabbing a heavy copper-sheathed cable that was vibrating wildly. She swung it, striking Thorn in the temple. He collapsed, unconscious, his body shielded from the electromagnetic field by the Aegis's protective geometry, but not from the raw impact. Elara leaned against the central basin, exhausted, as the white light subsided slightly, settling into a continuous, stable golden hum. The Aegis was locked into its protective phase. The shield of the second Zion was fully operational. The final mandate. Hours later, Elara stood in the now darkened, silent Aegis chamber, lit only by a faint, steady golden glow emanating from the orichalcum. The DHO agents had been momentarily disabled by the magnetic surge, and Kalen's network had already moved in, securing the perimeter and retrieving the unconscious Thorn. Elara knew the DHO would recover quickly, but their immediate goal, the weaponization of the orichalcum, had failed. The Aegis was now locked into its mandated state, a pure defensive system for the American continent's leadership and infrastructure, powered by the ancient ore. The true, final piece of the mystery came from Kalen, who came into the chamber carrying a small, intricate device, a danite sensor that could interface with the obsidian tetrahedron below. Kalen held up the sensor, its surface pulsed with scrolling text, the final dire calculation the master override had unleashed. The Zeal command didn't just activate the shield, Elara, Kalen said, his voice quiet and heavy. It caused the obsidian tetrahedron to calculate the precise timing of the great cataclysm. The Danites knew they couldn't just build a shield, they had to provide the exact warning. He read the date from the sensor. The day of reckoning. The earth's womb shall split, and the sky fire shall strike in the season of the waning moon, 17 years from the date of the Aegis's final activation. The date provided was 17 years from the present day, 1951, placing the cataclysm in 1968.
The massive solar flare and seismic event the Danites predicted was coming, and the world had less than 2 decades to prepare.
Ilara looked at Kalen, the final living link to the Watcher's lineage. The whole thing, the migration, the scrolls, Washington, the capital, it was all a grand 3,000-year engineering project to build a single survival mechanism and a political system stable enough to utilize it. Yes, Kalen confirmed. The treasure of the Copper Scroll was the survival of humanity. The gold was just a decoy. Now the knowledge is locked in the tetrahedron. The DHO can't access it, but the information must be prepared for the right people, the successors of the Second Zion's leadership, who will be in power in 1968. Ilara and Kalen had saved the immediate future from the DHO, but they had unleashed an unstoppable deadline. They could not reveal the existence of the lost tribe of Dan or the Orichalcum. The world would collapse into panic and chaos, and the very system the Watchers created would tear itself apart. Their new mission was clear: the Great Preparation. They would have to use the very anonymity and secrecy of the Watcher's lineage to discreetly guide the next 17 years of American political and scientific development, ensuring that in 1968, the person holding the office of the presidency understood the mandate and the purpose of the golden light humming beneath the Capitol. Ilara Vance, the young American archaeologist who found a strange copper scroll in a desert cave, had now become the newest and final watcher of the Second Zion, tasked with guarding the secret of the American founding and preparing the world for its date with destiny. The vast, hidden history of the lost tribe of Dan was secured not in an archive, but in the destiny of a nation that believed it was built on accident, not ancient design.